Thank you. So again, welcome. Thank you for joining. This is Presenting the Path, Module 3 of Discovering Buddhism. And I'd like to thank Thupten Khunga Center for hosting, Patty for being the individual host, and all the people that are responsible for supporting Thupten Khunga Center and helping it to present teachings like this. Thank you so much. Let's come with the right orientation to the program and the teachings. And I really want to thank all of you for being there with your screens on. And let me explain something that some centers mention as well as is let's pretend we are in person in a gompa, meaning in a meditation hall. It's really helpful, and I really appreciate your attentiveness. What happens is we've gotten kind of used to Zoom, and we got a little lazy with Zoom, some people, and we found this happened more months ago when centers weren't being clear about let's show up like you're respectful for the teachings. People were eating dinner while they're watching the teachings, having wine, laying in bed. Some people snoring, okay? So we don't want to do that. That's not really the best way to show up. Okay. So thanks for being here. Okay. Let's start with a little meditation to get ourselves in the right mind space. You can absolutely meditate sitting in a chair. If you're doing that, try to have your spine as extended as possible without leaning too heavily on the back of the chair or the cushion or the sofa. Again, Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, as if your sides are long. So there's a real extension to create this open flow of energy in your system. You can lightly close your eyes. And if you're seated in a chair, just have your feet straight down, flat on the floor or on a cushion, if that's more comfortable. Unless you're in a very wide chair where you want to be in a cross-legged posture, or feel free to be on a cushion. And then you can be in a cross-legged posture, absolutely fine. As you lightly close your eyes, begin to deepen your respiration. This is a fantastic place to start from, in general, in your practice. Find a way to allow yourself simply to be still. One time, 2 times a day, to just be still for a moment. Following your breath, normal, natural breath. Letting the bubbles of distracted thoughts sift away. As you let the distractions go, and there are many, that's perfectly normal. Just get a sense of how your mind is right now. And get a sense in a gentle way. Meaning you may notice you just came in from intensely stressful activities. You may be having a lot of physical discomfort in your body. Or you may be feeling pretty relaxed. Whatever the situation, Greet it with equanimity, meaning you're not getting down on yourself because you just snapped at someone and you came in from an intensely stressful situation. You're just watching right now. That is good enough. Just observe. Please reflect on your reason for showing up at this class right now. What would you like to get out of this class? And if you're noting that your attitude hasn't been so great right now showing up, we can adjust that. And if you find you are in a more spacious place, great, we can enhance that. And one great way of doing it is you directing your energy in a most positive way. This is about setting our motivation for our time together. This is you taking control of your mind. It's a lot about what this course is about, certainly what this path is about. Taking control of your mind. So, the motivation in this tradition of Buddhism is focused around benefiting and helping all living beings, which also includes yourself. The way we do that perfectly is once you become a Buddha, a fully enlightened being. This is the path there, and this course is about that path more specifically. So if that's something that interests you to benefit all living beings, feel free to include it in your motivation right now, meaning that you might think, I'd like to get some information on how to accelerate that path for myself. But the real purpose is to benefit all living beings. That's why I'm here right now. Or some other positive state for your mind right now. Just direct it in that way. So please set a good motivation for our time together and all the activities of the rest of your day. So Patty, can you share the Refuge Bodhichitta prayer? This is a prayer we often do before the teachings, and it does contain the whole path. Thank you so much. This is great. So let's read it twice in English, and then we'll chant it once in the Tibetan. And just think about the words. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. And we'll explain what they are, the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So the Buddha we know, historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, I'm going to talk about him a little later. Another level of the Buddha is the omniscient mind. Wouldn't you like to take refuge and find protection there in an all-knowing mind? That sounds pretty good. The Dharma are the teachings. And on an ultimate level, the teachings on emptiness, on the nature of reality. That's really what cuts the root of your suffering. The Supreme Assembly, sometimes called the Sangha, capital S Sangha, are those that have had a direct perception of emptiness on an ultimate level. On a relative or conventional level, the Sangha could be monks and nuns, fully ordained monks and nuns, or monks and nuns. For some people with small s, I might say your spiritual community, like a center, like Thupten Kunga Center. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Let's recite one more time in English. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. So let's look at this third line, by the merits I create. So if you're new to this path, and even if you've been on this path a long time, the thing we forget is creating the causes. We have to create the cause for our practice to start accelerating and to take hold, for the practice to manifest in a way that it gets easier for us. It's more conducive, like that. We need a lot of merit, which means a lot of positive energy in order for that to happen. And we forget that. We forget we have to create a cause for that to happen. When I was running some centers, people would ask me and say, oh, when's so-and-so Rinpoche going to come and teach? You know, when's so-and-so, this teacher, going to be back? And they didn't realize that we sent many request letters in person, hard copy letters. And sometimes I went to India and delivered the letters in person with an offering, with like a money offering, emailed letters to attendants now, phone calls to teachers, inviting them, meeting with them in person. I mean, this went over and over and over to request them to come. That's the only reason teachers teach is for instance, I'm requested, I'm asked by a center, can you teach? I don't just kind of say, well, I think it'll be nice to be in Florida, right? It's because you're requested. So it creates a cause for that teacher to teach. But what in your own practice? Something to think about. So for instance, a little bit of homework for you this week is, what are you creating the cause for? And here, I'll give you an example. The pandemic has been very strenuous for people. Okay? It's like nothing we've ever experienced. Okay. So I know a lot of people that took refuge in Netflix. Okay. It's really common. People that really, you know, I got to watch some films. I want to escape. I want to get this series of, and people start talking, are you seeing this TV show? You got to watch this, you got to watch that. Very common. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. But how much are you doing it? Where it becomes a habit where, you know, I have friends where every night they sit, you know, several hours in front of the TV, in front of a screen. They've got it there. That's what they do. That's their evening activity, whatever they do. So how much is doing it where you create a habit? That's what you got to do in the evening. Like if I don't have my TV show, and when that show ends, what am I going to watch next? What's the next series? And you ask people, what do you like? What are you watching? Okay. What if you have a meditation practice going like that? Then you go, well, it's harder. It's harder. I want to get real with you in this class. It's harder meditation. My mind's all over the place. And train it slowly, training, hanging out with your mind again and again, right? Doesn't mean you're going to be a great meditator after a year, okay? But you have some habit of being quiet, being still, being okay to be alone with your mind, to watch your mind, and to work with your mind. First of all, on a cushion, quietly in the stillness, learning more meditations, learning techniques and antidotes when a negative mind state arises. So when you're in your everyday activities, you're there with your mind and you're working with it right there at a business meeting, at a family dinner where somebody's irritating you, with a crisis in your life, with the loss of a loved one. You're able to deal with it because you're familiar with your mind. It's not suddenly like, I got to go to the TV show. This is too much. Okay. Now, the Netflix for a break, find a healthy way to have a rest and a break. We all need that. Okay. But think about the habits that you're making. Think about the habits. Is there anything you can do to turn up the volume on your spiritual practice? Like, can you borrow a half an hour from some wasted energy, wasted activity, where maybe I'm doing a little bit too much of that? And can I put a little bit of that into the practice? Well, here we've got a course that has some materials, readings, meditations. Maybe this is the start for you. Maybe this is the new chapter. Okay. But be gentle. Don't have too many expectations, because the other habits are right there to grab. But think about, by the merits I create, what merits are you creating? Because we need a lot of them to traverse along this path. We need a lot of them. I just had a little glimmer for me the other day of what it's like to be back in a spiritual community, what you can create. And what happened is, the other day we were doing a very special practice on a special 1 day a year day that happened on Friday. And a friend of mine was leading something for 8 of us. Started at 7 a.m. California time, and it went for 6 hours. It was 6 hours with breaks. But we've been doing some of these practices a little bit more regularly. I've been doing. And as a result, it purifies all your vows and it can create a very beautiful external reality. So we were doing this regularly in California every month for 9 years while I lived here and was running one of the centers. And we had what people call in the 90s here, like a pure realm, like all these incredible lamas were living here, giving teachings constantly, leading retreats. It was, a lot of people really talk about that time as quite a special time. And one of Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's attendants, said, well, we were doing these practices every month, these very deep, kind of high tantric practices that purify all your vows. And I believe it created a certain external scene. So just Friday doing this was very funny. Some of you are familiar with the teacher John Landau, right? He has taught in Florida, by the way. So I think some of you are familiar with him. He's a fantastic teacher. He's an incredible author, and he lives nearby, and he's a dear friend of mine. Well, his daughter has a bakery business. She's a very skilled baker. Anna, she's incredible. So she has an online business, and what she does is on Fridays, she takes the orders earlier. On Fridays, she actually delivers them, hand delivers them to people in this area, in the Santa Cruz, California area. So I wanted to support her, and I decided to go on, and I ordered some yummy things that I was going to offer to people as gifts and things, and they're delivered on Friday. Well, I'm in the middle of this 6-hour practice. We happen to take a break. I'm coming back from the break. There's a knock on the door here. Nobody comes to this cabin. It's like behind this other house. There's a knock on the door, and I'm like, what? It's John Landau at my door with the baked goods. Like, he's delivering from her. But for me, it was like a sign of, like, because I see him as such a great being that, I was like, oh my God, like, I'm creating this external reality. People are dropping these incredible baked goods at my door. And so it feels like you really, that's a very mundane level on one level, but you can start to create, what happens is we blame externally. I'm suffering. I want it to change, but you're not creating the causes. It's something to think about in your life. It's creating the cause like that. You can change almost anything based on your practice, based on the internal mechanisms in your mind. If you diffuse all the negative tendencies and all those negative seeds, positivity has to manifest. Okay, so what we're doing on this path right now is we're working to purify the negative imprints that have been made in this life and past lives. We're also working to enhance all the positive qualities to create merit. When you get rid of all the negative and you have such a storehouse of merit, right? Automatically you get enlightened. That's how it works. Keeping your vows along the way if you have vows. Okay? So let's one more time recite this prayer. We're gonna do it in the Tibetan phonetics. O Sangye Chodan Zogi Chonamla Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyap Suchi Dagi Chin Yingi Peso Namgi Drola Pencher Sangye Drup Parshong. And I want to just call attention to line 3 once again. This is the proper one before a teaching. When you're doing this in your own practice, the third line is slightly different. And it would say, by the merits I create through practicing generosity, through giving and the other perfections. Okay, so it would say Daigi Jin Sogi Pe Sonamki. So just a slight variation, but before the teachings, this is the proper one. Thank you. Thank you, Patty. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to watch the Presenting the Path video of Discovering Buddhism. And I'd just like you to see with different teachers, different students, an explanation of what we're going to engage in. So I'm going to share my screen and show you this video. And just let me know if you can't see it or you can't hear it.
Buddhism is a comprehensive system that shows us how to transform our minds from a state of suffering and dissatisfaction to one of extraordinary joy, awareness, and contentment. Vast in scope and profound in its implications, Buddhism accommodates every kind of mental disposition, but retains a laser-like precision that shows us what is to be accepted and what is to be rejected. It was realized and embodied by a human being like us. 2,500 years ago, an Indian prince named Siddhartha from the Shakya clan decided to give up his kingdom to search for a way out of suffering. Because of his relentless determination to find ultimate freedom, he came to understand the nature of his mind and in turn the ultimate reality of all phenomena. He was then called Shakyamuni Buddha. In this show, we will learn about the historical Buddha's life story, the spread of his teachings, and about the stages of the path to enlightenment.
In the following presentations, you're about to hear a great deal about the life, the accomplishments, and the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. Now, the Buddha worked very hard in order to attain enlightenment, and the impetus behind that hard work was his strong motivation to achieve ultimate freedom and to benefit all living beings as much as possible. And so remembering that we've discussed in the past the importance of our own motivation and modeling after the historical Buddha himself, now, before receiving these teachings, set in your own mind a strong motivation to be able to traverse this spiritual path, to reach enlightenment as quickly as possible in order to benefit all living beings.
one format that the life of Buddha is often.
So I'm just interrupting for a second. That's the Land of Medicine Buddha, Gompa, the center where I'm living. That is their meditation hall. Look, it still looks pretty much the same.
Presented in the Hinayana tradition is the presentation of what are called the 12 deeds. The 12 deeds are said to be the same activities that all of the 1,000 Buddhas who will appear during this fortunate eon in this world system, they'll all engage in these same kinds of activities. They won't have exactly the same lives. They'll be born in different ways, but they'll have certain format of their life that will be similar. And so for that reason, sort of, you might think it's just something that happened in the past, but it's going to happen in the future. So if you know about it, you can be prepared when Maitreya comes and others. In the Mahayana scriptures, it's said that the Buddha himself, the first deed is his leaving of Tushita, handing over the teachership of Tushita, the residency there, to Maitreya, who will be the next Buddha. And the second deed is entering into the womb. The Buddha entered into the womb of his future mother. And at that point, she had this dream, very spectacular and pleasant dream of a 6-tusked white elephant entering into her. And upon exiting the womb, upon his birth, the Buddha was able to stand up. This young boy was able to stand up immediately and walk 7 steps. The Buddha himself Siddhartha himself showed himself to be incredibly adroit and expert in many different things. And the next deed is called sporting or enjoying with the harem or retinue of wives, every kind of pleasure, every kind of sense pleasure, food and warmth, and various castles were built within the walls of the temple, of the city, of the royal city for Gautama. And it's during this point that he is now manifests kind of like what we might notice in the world when people get a little bit bored. He wants to go out of the temple as his first journey out. He did see some individuals, and on successive journeys, he saw at various times old people, sick people, and a dead person. And and each time he would ask his attendant, what is this? I've never seen this before. What is this old person bent over and so forth? Where with a cane? What's wrong with him? And his attendant would say, "This is an old person. This happened." And Siddhartha would say, "Well, is that unusual? Are there many of them?" And he would say, "This happens to everyone. Everyone, this is the fate of everyone." He saw someone who looked like a renunciate, someone who is seeking the meaning of life, seeking to transcend birth, death, and aging, aging, death, sickness, and so forth, the things that the Buddha had perceived. So this supposedly was the element now that began to coalesce, that clicked in the Siddhartha's mind. This is what I should do. I should leave home also. And he takes he takes his hair, his beautiful royal locks, and with his sword cuts them off. It's said that that's one of the relics. He goes off seeking teachers, seeking the answer to sickness and old age and death. And even though the teachers themselves were very fond of Siddhartha, recognized him as a prince and saw his great qualities and the fact that he achieved their state, even though they were the teacher, he'd achieved the same realization they did in a very short amount of time. They asked him to stay on and teach their disciples. He refused and went off to try to find an answer to this riddle that he had encountered. Sometimes living on just a small berry from the tree a day. Siddhartha became very emaciated. So at at this point, the Buddha himself is beginning to recognize that he's not making any progress. The Buddha went to bathe in the river, found himself very weak, couldn't even get out of the water. Began to worry, what's going to happen. He began then to beg some food. Now the Buddha is invigorated, Siddhartha is invigorated, and he seeks now a place to do meditation, then sits down on this cushion of grass with the determination, until I achieve the essence of enlightenment, I am not rising. So this is now the demarcation of the next act, which is called the defeat of Mara, or the defeat of the Maras. Mara is someone who it can be part of our own being, our own mind, or it can be something external that hinders our spiritual development. And that evening, he achieves his enlightenment, which is now called the next deed, under the Bodhi tree that evening, completely transformed, eliminating from his mind all the vestiges of ignorance and any kind of insufficiency, inabilities, and spends the next 7 weeks without moving very far away. So who shall I teach? Oh, those 5 disciples with whom I spent 6 years. Their minds are only, their Dharma eye is only slightly covered with the dust of ignorance. So he travels, knowing where they are, to the Deer Park near Sarnath, and he begins to teach them the very first discourse on the Four Noble Truths. And this is the beginning of this deed, which was essentially the next long period of the Buddha's life. So many decades teaching, and for the rest of his life at that time, after that time, spent many decades teaching, turning the wheel of Dharma, finally took the aspect of passing away, dying, passing into parinirvana. So that, in a nutshell, just as it's sort of an introduction, is a little bit about the life of the Buddha, the 12 deeds.
This is something you hear again and again, Lam Rim.
So this was a Gompa at Kopan Monastery that unfortunately was badly damaged in the earthquake a few years ago, and they've since knocked it down and built a new meditation hall.
Lam means path, and Rim means graduated or graded, step by step. And this way of practicing is very specific, to the Tibetan Buddhist presentation of the path. If we think a little bit about the history of Buddhism, because the Lam Rim contains all the Buddha's teachings on sutra. The sutra path, there's 2 paths, the sutra and the tantra. And the Buddha's path on sutra is divided up, in the Hinayana attitude and the Mahayana attitude. And the Hinayana and Mahayana path, they are all included in the Lam Rim. The main difference between Hinayana and Mahayana is mainly in the attitude, the purpose and the goal. That in the Hinayana, one motivates oneself for one's own liberation. In the Mahayana attitude, the attitude is seeking enlightenment, for the sake of all living beings, a more universal goal. And for that, we train ourselves in renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view. Of course, actually to attain enlightenment, one also have to practice Tantra. They say that one cannot attain complete full enlightenment without at some point practice highest yoga Tantra. But, if you look aside from the attitude, the actual practices of Hinayana and Mahayana go together. They're not sort of two completely separate paths. So the Lamrim contains all of the teachings. The Hinayana spread to different countries like Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma, Vietnam, and flourished there. Later on, when the Mahayana flourished, that spread to China, Tibet, Mongolia, and the northern countries, and flourished there. So anyway, the great Atisha, he came to Tibet, so he wrote the first Lamrim, the graduated path, taking all of Buddha's teachings, but putting it in a very clear, step-by-step, approach. And he called it the three scopes. So in Tibet, this really flourished. So this is what we still practice today. When you see these Lamrim texts and Lamrim books, it's all the same way of approaching the spiritual path and the inner development.
So Lama Atisha, what he did was he presented all of the essential points of Buddha's teachings in this experiential way, and he presented them essentially in three stages. First, second, and third scopes, they're called. Scope has a very specific meaning. It relates to the capacity of the practitioner, the scope, or the capability, as Lama Zopa says. So the first and second scopes of the practice of the teachings, they represent all the teachings, all the essential points in Buddha's teachings that we know as the Hinayana part of the path. Hinayana path. Then the third scope is the Mahayana part of the path. The three scopes altogether represent is all the practices that a person who's on the Mahayana path would practice, because you need to do the first two scopes in order to accomplish the third. Because if you're a Mahayana practitioner, you don't just do the third scope, which is all the compassion. The wisdom wing is the first two scopes, the Hinayana part of the path, and the compassion wing is the Mahayana path. Altogether, a Mahayana practitioner would practice all of these, because you need the first two, need the wisdom wing in order to accomplish the compassion wing. You need both wings. A bird needs two wings. So it's the way to working on the wisdom wing is where you really work on yourself. You turn yourself into this amazing being, then qualified to actually do the job, of benefiting others. And what we really are is a potential Buddha. If it is true that this is our true nature, this is who we really are, then we indeed need someone to show us how to do it. So we look to the need for a teacher. And then there are various ways that are explained in the texts of how to devote oneself appropriately, the very heart of which is the idea of training our minds to see the Lama, the teacher, the spiritual guide, as the Buddha. That the most benefit comes to oneself from this practice. And then Atisha gets this is that point of guru devotion is put there by the 14th century Lama of this tradition called Tsongkhapa. And the third point on the preciousness of this life that we have right now, not just to take it for granted. And this gives us enormous energy to want to not waste it. Then the first point we discussed in the first scope was the need to think about impermanence, but specifically the impermanence of this very person. which energizes us to even more want to not waste this life. But death is definite. Its time is uncertain, and that the only thing that can benefit us at the time of death is the virtuous imprints in our mind, nothing else. Then this leads us on to the next contemplation, the first scope, as we discussed, which is looking at the logical likelihood of suffering lives in the future, given that we have a continuity of consciousness that is literally beginningless, given that we've been within samsara, having ignorance and therefore delusions, and therefore being reborn again and again and again, and therefore creating negative karmas endlessly, as well as positive ones. So it's logical. It's just logical that there are there's a possibility of many suffering rebirths that our mind could take when it leaves this body at the time of death. So Atisha gets us to contemplate the suffering of the lower realms in order to energize us to have a healthy revulsion of being born in this way. This then leads us naturally to the next point, to turn for refuge to Buddha, who's the person who existed 2,500 years ago, who gave us the path, which is the actual refuge, the Dharma itself, the methods, the medicine to cure our minds, the methods to help ourselves transform ourselves, to avoid suffering in the future. And this leads us then to the culmination of the first scope, which is the essence of the practice, which is abiding by the laws of karma. Learning to know what to do and learning to know what to avoid doing, simply to avoid suffering and to get what we do want, which is happiness. It's a very practical solution, because one of the things that we're seeing clearly from understanding karma is that we are responsible for our own suffering and we're responsible for our own happiness, literally. In the second scope, we look more deeply, we look more in a more sophisticated way into our minds and start to see how even this life is in the nature of suffering. But it's much more subtle awareness we need to develop. Really is where we learn to be our own therapists. Understand very deeply in the context, for example, one way of looking at this whole scope is in the context that we discussed last week of the Four Noble Truths. That in the essential point of that is the third one, which is Buddha's assertion that we can be free of suffering. This then really prepares us now to practice the second wing, the third scope, which is the work we do in relation to others. The heart of which is the development of compassion, specifically the development of the very focused, highly developed level of great compassion called Bodhichitta. There's love and compassion, for example, these two essential characteristics. Love is the wish that others be happy. Compassion is the wish they don't suffer. It takes two different aspects of a person's life. So, if you love a person, you would see the person and you would be delighting in their good qualities. If you have compassion for a person, you look at the person and you have sorrow at their suffering. You wish they didn't suffer. You have empathy with them, their suffering. Right now, we have the wrong way of cherishing others. We do it because they're our friends and we want them to love us because we can keep being happy. It's completely got strings attached right now, the way we cherish others. And this is why, too, when we have our compassion now, we do have compassion now. We have compassion that's based on attachment. And so it always drags us down. That's why even if we're in the helping professions, we're being very compassionate. We get exhausted and drained. It drags us down. If we have to help people, mentally or physically, we get dragged down by it because we still have attachment to our own needs. So we're talking here of being way beyond attachment, really extraordinary, to go to extraordinary degrees of genuinely cherishing others with no strings, which is almost inconceivable in our culture. Because in our culture, ego is the reference point. It's the realization of the wisdom of emptiness that uproots finally the instincts of ego, which completes the wisdom wing. And then the work of benefiting others is what culminates, completes the active, proactive work of benefiting others, compassion. So it's then that person who finally becomes a Buddha, they've perfected the two wings, completed the two wings, completed the wisdom, completed the compassion.
But presenting the path, the Lam Rim, and the way that Lama Atisha and Lama Tsongkhapa put it together, it's like the blueprint. It's sort of taking all the Buddha's words and putting it into the order that we need to actually apply it in our lives. And so if I'm feeling like I'm a little bit lost, I don't really know where I need to put my energy and my attention and my practice, it's really easy. The teachings say, and I think this is really true, you can't develop the more advanced realizations if you don't have the very basic ones. I mean, if we haven't coped with our own impermanence and death and suffering, it's impossible to really have a true motivation to get out or even to help others, because we haven't really allowed ourselves to get in touch with how bad it really is, to give us the energy to develop the qualities to make it as good as it's possible to be. I think the first 12 or 13 years of my practice, I didn't do it.
So those are the prayer wheels at Milarepa Center. This segment was filmed at Milarepa Center in Vermont.
That way, I kind of was a lot more hit and miss and really into, trying these more advanced practices and thought they were really cool. But I don't think I fundamentally was becoming a better human being. And it's not until I really went back and thought, I'm not getting anywhere as fast as I wanted to go. So maybe I should do it the way they explain it, that you're really supposed to do it, and spend a year on precious human rebirth and spend a year on death and impermanence until something really moves in my mind. So that's been my experiment the last 3 to 5 years. And at least from my personal experience, my internal experience, I think I'm finally feeling some shifts take place. And the thing that I find really interesting is that as I focus really on the beginning steps, even though I'm focusing most of my attention on the beginning, the other areas actually come more into focus. It's almost like dominoes, a domino effect. Yeah, then it's just a question of not being lazy and stop wasting time and just do the steps. And then maybe become a Buddha, help some people or something. It'd be great. I'd like to.
Welcome back. So I'm realizing these videos were made about 20 years ago, and it's somewhat challenging to just see all my old friends much younger and healthier. So they all have various health issues going on now, 20 years along or 20 some years along, and some great practitioners there. And it's nice to just get that, especially Kendall at the end. She's on retreat in Crestone, Colorado, dear friend of mine, and just to see her trajectory. She's a great practitioner. And that's the thing, is when you do hear about Tantra and all these other things, and, can we make some investment now to get that foundation built, which is the Lam Rim, really investing ourselves to learn what these topics are about. How do they relate to my life? Can I find and eke out a section where I can meditate regularly on it? It's something Kendall's done. It's something a number of us have done, where you start to see from the regular practice that something is starting to shift in the mind. Something's starting to shift in the mind, quite significant. Now, what's happening now, and just be skillful about it, be reasonable, is what a lot of us on the spiritual path are talking about, is we're in what's called, Buddhism calls a degenerate time. And what that means is it gets harder to practice. The mind is more interested in other things, more worldly things. And it really does feel different to me than, say, 20 years ago. So we have to be a little bit more skillful in our practice, more realistic, and yet really get to the practice. And they say, and I was talking about this yesterday in a teaching, is the spiritual path is there and the accessibility is there, as well as the attainments, but it's like now getting through the eye of a needle. Like, it's a very slim, small space, but you can do it. Where 20 years ago or so, I had a lot of friends practicing taking a few months off to do retreat, things like that. It was a different time on the planet. So we can, again, you yourself can create this. What I'd like you to do between now and this next week is think about some of these things that were mentioned in the video. Think about your relationship with your practice. What would you like the practice to be for you? What is it not doing for you that you thought it would do? How might it do something for you? What do you think about that? What more can you invest in the practice? You know, are you clear about what you're doing? And granted, if you're newer, you're just dipping your toe in, that's fine. That's how we start to get engaged. So what I want to just go through in the video is Venerable George started off, gave us the life story of the Buddha. So I don't need to repeat that. A lot of you've heard the story before. What I'd really like you to do this week is I'd like you to spend some time thinking about this life story of this prince is born, you know, now maybe not a lot of us were born into royalty, okay? But the thing is, what I thought Venerable George mentioned, Venerable George now lives in North Carolina. He has a small cabin there. He's done some long retreat. He has some health issues right now he's working with, and he's still teaching online, which is great. Started to teach again. So the question is, when he mentioned that the Buddha got bored, the Buddha had every perfect sensory experience going on in the palace. Everything was available to him. Right? He finally was allowed out of the palace grounds, because we know one of the stories about his birth, which kind of mirrors a little bit of Jesus's birth, special that these wise men came to his father, the king, and had a divination and said, here's the deal. Your son is either going to be the heir to your kingdom, which is what the king wanted, right? Or he'll be a seeker, a spiritual mendicant. There were two paths available. Well, the father wasn't interested in his son being a mendicant, going off and seeking. So he shrouded the prince, wouldn't let him out of the palace grounds, made everything perfect for him. But eventually he was allowed to go out when he saw the four individuals: old person, sick person, dead person, and a spiritual mendicant, and asking the attendants about those situations. So, and again, there was something burning in the Buddha from previous lives of practice, where having all those wonderfully easy life and all the beautiful wife and all the wonderful things wasn't satisfactory for him. So I'd like you to just look at your own life of what got you into the Dharma. You know, what was the quest? What were the questions you were asking yourself? What wasn't meeting your expectations? You know, because probably a lot of us have relatively easy lives. I don't know all of your stories, right? But I think to some degree we have the fact that we right now have electricity, internet, whatever it is, have a computer to watch us on. We have a pretty good situation: food, clothing, shelter, like that. But there's something at times, something got turned up where we kind of said, you know, is this it? You know, having all these other things, is it worth it? So it's nice to kind of compare your life to the Buddha. And you might say, well, I'm not an Indian prince, but there's many similarities of what was it that got you to your first Buddhist class? What interested you? What was the book you read? Who was the person you met? And what was going on in your life? So what else might you need to do now at this level that can a little bit turn up the heat on your practice like that? There are a lot of this path takes effort. So what are the things? So it's a very moving story of him leaving all the trappings of the palace, leaving a wife, leaving a child, right? But not leaving out of escape. I don't want responsibility. Leaving out of taking enormous responsibility. I have to find a way to end the suffering for all beings. I have to find a way to stop the sickness, old age, death for all beings. There's got to be a cause to the suffering. You know, I need to first figure out the cause to be able to dismantle that. So that really was the motivation for the Buddha. What motivates you in your practice? Something I'd really like you to look at this week. And then I like the image of one of the 12 deeds, similar to Jesus's life, where you can, you know, if you go to Jerusalem, you can see the steps, the stages of the cross. of the same deeds of Jesus's life and how the different stations of the cross. So the part where the Buddha cuts his hair, that shows cuts his hair, and somehow it was just reminding me when I got ordained and the hair cutting, and when a friend of mine came over where we decided, my boyfriend and I were going to get ordained, and you have to cut your hair and you leave a little bit on the top so that they can actually do a hair cutting ceremony for the lamas to do, but everything else you shave off. And so the cutting my hair when I had a lot of hair, and somehow the first cut that my boyfriend did, and then a friend helped us, shave our heads and things. And there was this something came from the past of freedom for me. Like initially I thought I was really attached to my hair, really afraid of what was I going to look like, it was a major deal. A lot of people attached to my hair. And somehow that first snip, and I just had this moment of like freedom, like that. So it was interesting to see the Buddha cutting his hair. And then going into Venerable Karen, who teaches at Kopan Monastery for years. She's taught these intro courses like that. She mentioned the Lam Rim, stages on the path, okay? A gradual path to enlightenment, according to the Sutrayana approach. Sutrayana are the discourses the Buddha gave. In his lifetime of teaching, more than 40 years, he gave 84,000 different discourses, sutras, like that. So she was talking about how they got organized, finally. There's commentaries on them. And basically, the Hinayana tradition, Mahayana tradition, she explained the different countries involved, how Buddhism spread from this Indian prince, spreading out throughout Asia, also spreading into Afghanistan and Pakistan, like that, and how the Hinayana is very focused on Hinayana individual vehicle what individual vehicle is getting yourself out of the suffering, just focused on yourself very much, of wanting to end your own suffering, like that. And then Mahayana, and Hinayana is also seen as lesser vehicle. I don't really like the term. It seems like it's inferior. You really need both vehicles. Mahayana, Maha, greater vehicle, or I would say universal vehicle. So basically, I want to get enlightened, but not just to end my own suffering. I want to benefit all living beings. So it just takes it to another trajectory. Those were the northern countries that adopted Mahayana Buddhism, like that. So she mentions that and talks about Master Atisha. She had introduced him. Master Atisha, Buddhist saint who came from India, okay, lived from 982 to 1054, and basically brought Buddhism. I mean, after Guru Rinpoche brought Buddhism initially to Tibet, previous couple centuries before that, Master Atisha came and had a very famous text called Synthesizing the Buddhist Sutras in a unique way, synthesizing it into a text called A Lamp for the Path. Okay, a lamp for the path to enlightenment, basically. And it is from that text that the Lam Rim grew. And the Lam Rim basically further synthesized by a Lama that turned up 1347 to 1419, Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug tradition and Ganden Monastery. And the Gelug tradition is our tradition of Buddhism. And he's the one that further synthesized it into the Lam Rim and has various commentaries on that. A small scope commentary, a medium length commentary, a great treatise called the Lam Rim Chenmo, based on the different details of going into the Lam Rim. So I just wanted to explain the Lam Rim, how it works. There's various scopes I'm going to talk about in a minute. Originally coming again from Lama Atisha's A Lamp for the Path. Some of the required readings in this course come from this book, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, okay? This is the Wisdom Publications 1 volume, Liberation, okay? It's also translated into 3 volumes that look like this. There's a blue one and a red one, and the first volume is a gold one. It's the exact same teaching given by Pabonka Rinpoche in Lhasa around 1945 to a vast community of monks just before the Chinese invasion about 10 years later. It was then recorded by his disciple, His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, who was the junior tutor to the Dalai Lama in his past life. Actually, His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche lives in northern Vermont right now. I used to visit him, and he's got a slightly different life, but he does teach. So again, this version is called Liberation in Our Hands. They're the same teaching, just different translation. Both volumes are great. I mean, both types are great, and that's some of the readings. And this will give you more details on the Lam Rim in a more detailed approach like that. So again, don't get too bogged down in the, this is a big Bible type of book. There's smaller Lam Rim books, and there's basically 18 different Lam Rims that they say, different types of Lam Rim teachings that have been given over the years by ancient beings like that, scholars. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama gave teachings for several years on those 18 Lam Rims, which was phenomenal in India. But mainly you could start with a thinner Lam Rim book, like something called the Essential Nectar. Fantastic beginner book on the Lam Rim, just getting used to that, of what are the topics? What do they say about each topic? If you're newer, start with something like that. The next book I might go to as far as Lam Rim is something called The Essence of Refined Gold by the third Dalai Lama. The Essence of Refined Gold. Again, a simpler Lam Rim book, very easy to follow the outline in that. When you feel somewhat that you've read those, you like those, you're understanding the topics, then you may want to jump into Liberation in the Palm of Our Hands. Either the 1 volume or the 3 volumes. I happen to prefer the 3-volume translation a little bit more, but it's your own personal preference. And you might, and topic by topic, go through, study, make sure you understand, ask your questions to other students or qualified teachers. But here's the key, is to meditate on those topics. That's the hard part for us. There's a lot of people doing DB, Discovering Buddhism courses. People taking all these classes that are online now, which is great because you can listen to any teacher anywhere and just stay home, right? But we're not getting to the meditation as well. That's the harder part. That's the harder part. So slowly, and I hope when I come to Florida in person, we can sit a little bit more, but I am gonna, in the future classes, lead you through some meditations and ask you, try your best, okay? You can print them out. You can have a screen in front of you. You're going to read a couple sentences on your own of the meditation. And then you want to deeply go in there and really apply your own life experience. What did the scriptures say about that? What have you read in the readings? It supports, the meditation supports the readings. The readings help you meditate, but to know what to meditate on. It's the meditation going deeper and deeper. Applying your own life experience, I said as well, is very important, that starts shifting your mind. Shifting your mind. I'll give you an example. Part of the lower scope of the Lam Rim, death and impermanent teachings, as some of you know, death and impermanence. We tend to not want to hear about death. That's scary. It might be painful. It might be horrible. I don't know what comes next, right? The thing is, if you meditate regularly on a 9-point death meditation, which is traditional in those teachings, the Lam Rim text will outline and tell you how to do it. That. The other thing I want to point out to you that I love, one of my favorite things, in the red volume, Liberation in Our Hands, in the red volume, which is volume 2, okay? In the back, there's appendices, okay? Appendix D is an outline, okay, of the Lam Rim. It gives you the whole thing, but Appendix F is how to meditate on the stages of the path. How to meditate on the stages of the path. And what it does is it doesn't take you through the entire Lam Rim, but it basically gives you literally topic by topic what you want to think about with each topic. With death, what you want to think about, how do you want to go over and over, okay, until you come to this experience, it'll say. Then you go to the next topic. Then you over and over, and I've used that outline so many times in retreats I was doing. So again, the more you put into this path, the more you're going to get out of it. What happens is a lot of us are at the surface dabbling, and we kind of put our toe in the water and we go, wow, that feels pretty good, right? But it's just our toe, right? And then we get a little afraid to put the whole foot in, or we kind of get lazy and we go, well, I don't know, this looks easier over here. Let me go back to that. That was a quick delivery of, instant gratification, having the ice cream cone. That was easy. My regular life, like that, watching Netflix or whatever you're doing, right? But the thing is, if you can actually really start to engage and get into those meditations, something starts shifting. That's been my experience. But again, it requires more time to meditate, and it requires you setting up a good supportive meditation practice. So again, happy to help. Let's help with this class. This will give you fodder to meditate on, like that. Okay, let me talk about the scopes of the Lamrim, and then I'll take some questions. There are 3 scopes. This is the way Master Atisha laid it out based on capability, as Venerable Rubina said, capability. So the 2 lower scopes are you developing your wisdom faculty. The last scope deals with Bodhichitta, the teachings on Bodhichitta, where you are developing compassion. Method, they call that, the method side. So the wisdom side is our view. I have to get the correct view oriented, one wing of the bird. The method side is related to compassion and our skillful means. Me then thinking about all living beings. You need both wings of the bird, method and wisdom, to get enlightened, to fly to enlightenment. So let me discuss these 3 scopes are based on your motivation. They will say there's topics that are relational to beings with a lower, they'll say lower capable being. So it sounds like you're inferior, but let's talk about a lower capable being. What's their motivation? Well, you might be really terrified of what's going to happen to you when you die. It's unknown. And so these are topics that are included in this. Why it's advantageous to be a human, precious human rebirth. Okay. Number 2, this situation of this life is quickly passing away, death and impermanence. Next topic. Okay. And then when you do die, things could be a lot worse, lower realms of existence. So it talks about the other realms, 3 lower realms, but also a higher realm of existence, a couple higher realms that we want to avoid, because the optimum rebirth is to be a human, okay? Because you have a balance of leisure and suffering. Suffering motivates you to want to practice and get out of this mess of samsara, okay? The leisure affords you the space to practice like that. So it'll explore the other realms of existence. And then when you realize there's other realms, you get kind of nervous. I don't want to be in a hell realm. That's terrifying. I won't be able to bear it. The next topic is refuge. Well, what's refuge about? Protection from more suffering. Well, what does that mean? How do I get protected? What are you reaching for now in refuge? Something I'd like to ask you as a 3rd homework topic. Okay, let me just repeat. Number 1, what are your habits right now? This is number 1 homework thing. What are your habits? And what I'm going to do, if it's okay with Patty, I'm going to send you an email midweek. Okay, so it is Tuesday right now, and I'm going to send you an email around Friday. I'm going to send it to Patty if it's okay. Patty, can you send my email out to the participants in the group? Okay, I'm going to send you a reminder email. Are you thinking about your homework? Hello. Like, do this like really spend some time thinking about it. Make some notes. So the first is, what are you creating merit doing? Meaning merit for your practice. What are you doing for your practice that's creating an ability for you to practice more and get a juicy practice going, something that attracts you to want to do more practice. Number 2, homework. The life story of the Buddha. How does it relate to your own life? What are some of the similarities? What are the differences? What inspires you about the Buddha's life? That you go, I can do that. I think I can do that. What parallels are there? What's confusing about it? What disturbs you about it? Really relate it to your own life situation. You are capable of anything, seriously. You can do anything you put your mind to. It's extraordinary. Number three. Number three is, oh, I've just lost that. What was anybody remind me? Was
You mentioned habits first. What are your habits?
I mentioned the habits, then I said the life story of the Buddha, number two, but I was just thinking of a third thing, talking about the lower scope motivation. I'll come back to it. I'll think about it. So what I want you to do in when you get, oh, I know, here it is. What do you take refuge in now when you suffer? What do you reach for? What do you do? What do you think about? What do you think is going to protect you from more suffering right now? Does it really work? Ultimately, is it protecting you from more suffering? So that's something I'd like you to look at as well, those three things for this week. So then we get into refuge, okay? And what happens in the Lam Rim is you're reading some of this when I'm doing a refuge Monday nights. I'm starting a refuge module this Monday for Landau Medicine Buddha, which you can join. It's a little later for the East Coast folks. Is with refuge, you're seeking protection. And what we take refuge in on the path is Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So you're eventually going to read about them. What are their qualities? It inspires you. You realize, wow, this is really something to take refuge in. And that's one of the topics, lower capable being. After you find proper refuge on the path, you then need to know how to conduct yourself. And that goes into the teachings on karma. Okay. So all of those topics right there are designed for a lower capable being's motivation. I'm terrified of what could come next. I need to figure out an orientation for my mind. And all of those topics are related to that kind of motivation. Okay. So then based on that motivation, on all those topics, you come to the scope for the medium capable being, middle scope, Lam Rim. And these topics deal with the 3, the 6, and the 8 types of suffering, all the different kinds of suffering, the ways we suffer. Okay? Talking about the 4 Noble Truths, first teaching the Buddha gave, I'll talk about in the next class. And so you explore the different sufferings, relating it to your own life, doing meditations on that, okay, to begin to develop renunciation. Okay, and true renunciation is, and this is something in the quote by His Holiness near the end of the video, where His Holiness said about giving up this life, giving up attachment to this life. That's true renunciation. And Lama Yeshe mentions it very simply, is what real renunciation is giving up whatever disturbs your mind. Think about it. Giving up whatever disturbs your mind. What disturbs our mind? Anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, anxiety, depression. These are the things that disturb your mind. Okay? Some of us are clinging on to these things. I know people that think it's okay to get angry. I know people that equate attachment with love, with pure unconditional love. We're mistaken. Some people think pride is great. Arrogance is the way they behave, and they've always been that way. They're better than everyone. We cling to stuff like that. The other thing is we're habituated with those delusions, with those imbalances. So it's very hard for us to turn from them even when we want to. This is a path that helps you do that, okay? But it takes effort. Okay. So we explore the middle scope, we explore all the sufferings because you're very motivated. This kind of being is, I want to get rid of my suffering. You know, I'm terrified of what could come next, but I realize even in this life, there's a lot of suffering, and that's really not okay. So I really would like to get rid of suffering for myself. Okay. And you come to an understanding of emptiness, focused with the right concentration, where you can really rip out the root of your suffering by understanding how ignorance functions and dismantling that ignorance. Okay. Built on those 2 motivations, on those 2 scopes, you come to, you know, even if I'm free of suffering, what about all these other beings suffering? So now we have the motivation for the higher capable being. You're focused on others. It's not just enough for my own suffering to end. What about all these beings? And that's how we develop the good heart, by exploring the teachings on Bodhichitta, the enlightened attitude, and the 6 perfections to become a Buddha. Okay, so those are the three scopes laid out by Lama Atisha in A Lamp for the Path. Please, any questions? Yes, Tony.
Hi, Venerable Amy. I'm sure you've been asked before, but you mentioned about Jesus and the three kings. I was curious to ask if you were a Christian in the past, and also what led you to Buddhism.
Well, in some past life, I'm sure I was Christian, because we've been all things and everything, but this particular life, I come from a Jewish background. I had a strong belief in God, and we were traditionally Jewish. We weren't super religious, but I had quite a Jewish education on the side of my secular education. And it's a kind of funny story, but I won't go into the whole thing here. But a strange thing happened is I went to a Jewish summer camp for 2 months, one summer, where you live there for 2 months. It was an educational camp. And I loved the camp. I got a lot out of it because I suddenly met people at the age of 13 or 14, right? When kids are going into puberty and there's a lot of peer pressure, is I met other kids and you could talk about that you believed in God, which wasn't cool to do at school, okay? So when I met all these kids at the camp, and they were just regular people and great people, some of them I'm still friends with, it's amazing. We had a canoe trip. Every summer you go on a canoe trip and you go for a few days, and we went on a canoe trip, and I was a very strong swimmer. I had learned swimming and junior life saving, and there was a little place, we took a break, and there was a thing in the river where you could, a natural slide made of the stones, and on, and whatever happened is we were all playing in the thing, and I got carried out further into the river, Delaware River in the Poconos of Pennsylvania. And the river where it was just over my head. The current was kind of strong. I swam for like 45 minutes, really strong, and I was getting further and further away. I nearly drowned is what happened. I ended up under the water, couldn't get back up to the surface after a while, exhausted. It's a long story. So whatever happened, something happened to me under the water. And, I think I was close to drowning. And after all the horror and the terror, it's funny, I don't talk about the story very often, but after all the terror and the horror and the pain of, and the identity, I'm 14 years old and I'm dying, and there was just this gigantic no in my mind. Everything went away, all of that stopped. And there was this fleeting, I don't even know what I could call it. There's really no words for it, but there was this fleeting experience of bliss. That there was no Amy, there was no even naming bliss. This is the energy that I was, that we all are, I think, fundamentally, I think we all are. And I couldn't even explain it. And then at the next moment, just whatever consciousness I had, whatever thing I remembered, whether I remembered it accurately or not, I can't say. I can't say whether it was a dream or did it happen, but the next thing I remembered was pain in my wrist. Because a counselor had yanked me out of the river by my wrist in a life-saving thing. And then I remember I was back on the bank and was kind of choking and vomiting water, and I couldn't see for half an hour and I couldn't speak. And all I knew is that you had these kids in my age group of all the bunks that we had gone on the canoe trip, of a very playful, happy, loud, noisy time splashing in the water. And there must have been, I'm not sure how many there were, like 80 of us, 70 or 80 of us, and everybody was dead silent. Like when I kind of came into consciousness and seeing people around me, nobody was speaking. So something happened. And the thing was, I couldn't discuss it with I didn't know who to talk to about what happened to me under the water. It was just, they were concerned about the drowning. Was the whole focus. Sorry, it's such a long story. I can't really go into the whole thing, but there was a swim instructor who was physically not very attractive. He had burned himself, scalded himself as a 4-year-old when, and so he was, swim instructor often didn't have a shirt on or anything, and he was scarred all over his body and his part of his face. And a lot of people didn't like him, and he was kind of a little lecherous to the girls and things like that. He was a little older than us. And so one day he asked me to stay after the swim class. And I thought, oh no, what now? You know, is he gonna do? And we're standing on the dock, and I got my towel around me, you know, I just want to go back to the bunk and get changed. And I suddenly felt this feeling that he wanted to say something to me. So he said, he started talking, and he said, you know, I've been watching you. And he said, you have a chameleon personality, which I thought was a kind of weird thing to say to a 14-year-old. And I knew a chameleon was this animal that changes color with its environment. And then he said, you know what a chameleon is? I mean, you know, and I thought that was really interesting that he said that. I was really intrigued by, you know, and then he said, do you know, and then he suddenly turned to me and he said, kind of leaned in and he said, do you ever wonder, you know, and I was like, wonder what, you know, and then he said, do you ever wonder who you are when you stop changing color? So it was really interesting to have this, you know, like, and I wanted to scream to him and say, yes, I do. Because this was a time, you know, when you're 14, you're kind of ending childhood and you're getting conscious, and I was always writing and thinking, and, you know, was in these literary groups in high school and things like that. And so but I didn't know how to communicate with him because I was just this kind of immature 14-year-old kind of, you know, so I didn't really, it kind of riveted me, but I didn't know what to say. So I just stood there and I shrugged, and then I think he thought he wasn't getting through. So he said, oh, can you go back to your bunk? That was it, you know. So that was a couple weeks before the canoe trip. Canoe trip happened, the near drowning happened. He didn't go on the canoe trip, but obviously I thought they're going to tell him when I come back to swimming, he was the swim instructor, that she nearly drowned. So you need to take care with her when you ask her to go in the lake or whatever. I figured they'd tell him what happened. Wasn't, you know, they'd have to tell him. So what we did is we do calisthenics before we get in the water, and I'm in the back of the thing and we're doing the calisthenics, and suddenly we stop. And he yells back at me and he says, hey, Amy. And he said, he looks right at me and he says, I heard you had a really interesting experience on the canoe trip. And I get chills every time I think of it, because I knew that he knew what happened to me under the water. He wasn't talking about the drowning. There was some kind of lock that he had, like something else. So let me fast forward now, 14 years old. I'm going to go to 27 years old. I go to Tibet. I do my first Buddhist course, decided to change plans, go to Tibet with a big class of Buddhist students of Lama Zopa Rinpoche I just met. There's 60 people. I know nothing much about Buddhism. I did my first little 10-day course. I don't know much. I'm not a Buddhist. And we're looking at all of these images of these protectors and wrathful deities in these Tibetan meditation halls and monasteries. And they look like the swim instructor. The bulging belly and the eyes bulging out of I mean, they look just like him. I'm looking at them going, I don't know if he was like some kind of messenger. I know this sounds a little bit woo-woo, and I was a total skeptic at the time. But I do feel like there's messages from the universe. And that was a pivotal time for me of what happened at 14 years old, that no one could ever tell me what happened. I even went to rabbis and tried to explain, and they said, you don't need to worry about that. One rabbi even said to me, you should just get married and have babies. Don't worry about that, right? I tried interfaith groups to ask somebody that I felt safe with, that wasn't going to think I was crazy, could you tell me what happened under the water? Because the reason was, I want to find that experience again. That's help. I mean, that experience was extraordinary. The thing is, we can all find that experience, right? I've had touches of that experience in meditation. So that experience is who you really are. Utter, incredible bliss, never ending bliss. Like that, that's there. I'm not any special person, believe me. I'm not living in that reality all the time. I'm not. Okay, I'm just like you, I'm muddling along, but fortunately I had that experience. Now I can't say that people from that Jewish summer camp are all excited that I'm a Buddhist nun now, right? right? It's funny talking with some of them and explaining the story. And but it was something shifted. And later when I came into Buddhism, they were like, we can tell you exactly what happened. So that's kind of partly how I got here. Sorry for the long story.
That was a really great story. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Elaine has her hand up, please.
I'm not sure how that happened. I don't really have a question, but that was a great story. I'm glad you shared it with us, truly.
Did you have a question, Elaine?
No,
Oh, no.
I really don't. I don't.
Okay, great.
Good.
Thank you. I know we're a little bit over. Any other questions?
May I ask you something? I think it was Venerable George who spoke about the 12 deeds of the Buddha.
Yes.
It's a very silly question, but how does the Buddha become a Buddha? Is it like a saint that then after they die, okay, we humans decide, oh, that was a saint? How does that happen? How does that person get the title?
That's a great question, Cecilia. There's no silly questions, really. Is what happens is because Buddhism believes in reincarnation, that there's a life before this life and one before that, because there's no beginning to our mind, which is not the brain in Buddhism, and we're going to talk about that next week, is the Buddha made a lot of investment in previous lives. So in a sense, yes, it made him into a saint when he came back as the Indian prince, and in previous lives when he was a high-level bodhisattva. High-level bodhisattva is like a Buddhist saint, and they're all very focused on getting enlightened so they can benefit all living beings. So basically, he had all of those imprints, all of that merit again, all the merit he created from these past lives doing incredibly good deeds that created the situation for him to finally have the merit to become a Buddha. Along with, I'll mention his effort, the tremendous effort that he made. First of all, think of the effort of just leaving the kingdom and leaving his wife and child. That's not an easy thing to do. I don't think he did it easily like that. So, and actually on some of the pilgrimages I've led to India and Nepal Buddhist sites, we go to where the temple grounds supposedly are, and they're uncovering remains of the grounds, these relics, and each time I've gone there, there's more and more they've uncovered of what they say is the Buddha's palace where he was raised. Kapilavastu, it's called. And the last time I was there, they had uncovered more where they thought they had the gate, the pillars, which was the gate that he left out of. And then they found bones of a horse on another mound, a hill, a little distance away, where they said he left the horse to go on foot, and the horse died of a broken heart, and they found the remains of the horse. So now again, you can say it's legend, but there were all these as well previous lives of stories that are called the Jataka tales. And those are often read on our auspicious holidays to inspire us of the previous lives of the Buddha. Does that answer your question?
Yes and no. Another example, let's say the Dalai Lama. Let's say that he passes away, like in 3 years, we are going to say he was a Buddha?
Well, some people see him as a Buddha now. Some people see him as an enlightened being now. So it really depends on your own belief system and how you relate to these beings and things like that. So I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding the question as far as, like in Catholicism, there may be a great person, and then later after they die, they're canonized, I believe. In Buddhism, it's slightly different. You can be alive and become a Buddha. You can still be in this life alive, living, and become a Buddha and just attain that enlightened mindset. You don't need to wait till you die till people then recognize the deeds. Slightly different like that, yeah. So let's stop there for this evening. I want to thank you for your questions and thank you for your participation. I'm just going to do a short dedication right now. And what I'd really like to do is we always dedicate at the end, after motivating in the beginning of any activity, you can make it virtuous by the nature of your motivation and dedication. The dedication closes, and may we then invest whatever merit or positive energy we've created from being together and focusing on these topics in this class, to invest it in our swift enlightenment so that we can benefit all living beings. But I'd also really like to dedicate to all the beings around the planet suffering with COVID or other severe illnesses, mental and physical. May they be released of those situations immediately and know ultimate happiness. And for those who've recently passed as well, like that. And let me just share some quick dedication prayers and a couple of long life prayers from our teachers, of our two main teachers. Just going to share this document. Oops. Wait, I forgot to, let me just close that. I forgot to open the document. Here we go. Let's read this verse together. May the precious supreme Bodhichitta not yet born arise. May that arisen not decline, but increase more and more. However many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed from all sicknesses. May all the sicknesses without exception of transmigratory beings never occur again. And the long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And let's really think about His Holiness. Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, really think about His Holiness when you say this prayer, and let's really think about Lama Zopa Rinpoche. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. For Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. I'd also like to dedicate to the great flourishing of our centers, especially Tutankunga Center. Thank you so much. And I look forward, don't forget your homework, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And if you get the materials, start looking at the meditation on renunciation and start some of the readings as well, would be really helpful.
Venerable Amy, just real quick, I've put my email address. Everybody in the Zoom room should have gotten the materials from me and an email from me by now. If you did not, I just put my email address in there. Please write me. There seems to be a little bit of a problem, but everybody should have what they need to have. And I will forward the reminder of the homework when I receive it. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Venerable Amy. Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Please enjoy.
Thank you, Venerable Amy.
Please be well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.